both in European and other parts of the world. Ancient Greece, especially Athens, is presented as a paradigm of democracy. But I understand a lot of that in its own context, that a lot of Athenian democracy was very tied to a militaristic stance, to the connection of the individual to the state, the duty to support the state. Is in your findings, in your various lines of research, what is the connection between democracy and the military in Athens or other city-states in ancient times?
Want to go onward? That's a general question. Or do you have anything? Didn't you talk about soldiers? It was important the soldiers had access or something? Yeah, you want to go?
Let's do what he says. I'll see.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for that question. To really understand the political realm of Athens is to understand the transformation of the political realm of Athens. As I was saying in my presentation, from the death of Pericles onward, Athens had completely changed. Athens had become from a city-state for Athens and changed into a city-state for the person, for the individual. And this brought about several changes, one being the fact that a oligarchy was put in favor of a democracy, and the fact that at this time the individual really didn't have an opinion as to a particular form of government, but really went along with what was popular at the time in order to achieve their own individual agenda. And this is none other. This is not like. This is obviously seen with Alcibiades and with others as well. Most notably Alcibiades, but it's the whole entire country. Really, the city-state contributed to the fall of it.
So there's a kind of evolution towards
Absolutely.
a demand, as these wars, such as the ones that you and others.
Absolutely, yeah. The Peloponnesian War was the final straw.
Yeah, I wouldn't say this. I would say war kind of arose from democracy and how it was. What I read in my research was that it was kind of corrupt in a way, and that war, it could be attributed to Pericles, for instance. He was charged with embezzlement or something like that, and so one person thinks, that's why he passed the Garen Decree to pretty much spark the Peloponnesian Wars, because he wanted to take attention off himself. So that pretty much, went from democracy to war that way, simply from not wanting to be humiliated or, be seen even less powerful than what he was. And also, honestly, in their assemblies and whatnot, it was pretty much the bigger guy was still, stronger than the little guy. People could still get pushed around even with these governments in place, and it happened often.
In your description, it sounds a little like an ancient wag the dog scenario, like that movie of that theme.
Dr. Ryder, you got it all.
Hey, Courtney. I had the opportunity to read her paper, and I was quite impressed. I wanted to ask you, Hatayrai, which she just barely had a chance to go over in her presentation. These are very high-class girls, who are generally foreigners. Can you say that about the lower-class prostitutes as well, or are they, from what you can tell, Athenians?
No, there's also foreigners that can be low class. Like, there was an example in my paper, and I forget her name now, but she worked in a brothel, and one of them decided to pull her up, and she became a hetero. The classes were very flexible. Either if you were a good prostitute, you could go far. If you started going downhill, maybe getting older, then you would find yourself working back in the brothels if you didn't retire in time. I think it's kind of a mix of what you find. Foreigners are in there. I find a lot of the times that some of the citizens decide just to be housewives. they don't think that there's going to be a better life for them. They kind of are nervous to take that jump, maybe, to make sure they have that money. They're not sure.
Now, you concentrate on Athenian prostitutes, correct?
Yeah, there was a lot of sources from Athens. That's the majority of the sources I found.
Did you have a chance to look at the Eastern Greek prostitutes? It's a very different kind of group, mostly because you have one group of respectable prostitutes in the Eastern Greeks, and those are the sacred prostitutes. Did you get a chance to take a look at the sacred prostitutes?
I didn't really get a chance to look at them, though. I mean, I know there were some in temples, and they found them as sacred prostitutes, and they would work in the temple like that, but I didn't really like see any other kind of information.
I think you'd find it fascinating.
Okay.
Alex, you kind of danced around the issue of one of the biggest controversies in the Peloponnesian Wars, and we're going to be arguing about this for decades to come, probably in the next 2,500 years. You suggested that the walls were a challenge, that this was one of the first of the challenges. One of the more recent theories out there is that this was a game that we don't completely understand. That Sparta was supposed to be the winner. Sparta had the biggest army. Sparta had the most respected aristocracy. Sparta was number one, and that the aggression of Athens wasn't so much a physical aggression as the audacity to try to beat number one at its own game. What do you think of that theory?
I think that has a lot of stock to it, actually, and a lot of sources touch on, that struggle of Athens and Sparta wanting to just kind of one-up each other. I don't know. I think that was an interesting theory to look at. But, I don't know where you want me to go with it, but...
It's a direction that you can come see me afterwards. I'll load you down with a few books. But it's an interesting new direction, suggesting that when we're trying to decipher the Peloponnesian Wars, it's like playing a game and only knowing about half of the rules. That there were rules of conduct, professional etiquette, military etiquette, that Athens cheated at. And that's why it was the aggressor, is because it didn't play the game. It used democracy, which was a brand new idea, that made it fix the rules in a different way, and everyone yelled foul, because they weren't doing it the way you're supposed to do it, which is the way Stetson was doing it. So, you might find this a fascinating direction, but this is fairly new theories. Garen, you looked at Lysistrata. Did you look at the clouds?
Like I said, I didn't really have a lot of time to look to talk about everything I looked at. I actually looked at a few others as well. I looked at frogs. I didn't really touch on the clouds as much. I know it's important to the outlook of Alcibiades, but no, I really didn't focus too much on plays. I did mention briefly, probably about 3 in my research. But mostly, the only really work I really mentioned was Platonic Dialogue.
It's kind of an important little play because, Pheidippides, who is actually Alcibiades, very thinly disguised, it is shown the way that the man on the street would see Alcibiades as this stuck-up, arrogant playboy who in the end ends up beating his father.
Yeah.
You may want to go take a look at Pheidippides again.
Yeah.
That wasn't bad.
That wasn't bad. Well done, Harrison. Go ahead.
Yeah, my question is for Courtney. Courtney, I really liked your presentation. I like arguments like that find agency in places where we don't expect it. I wondered if you could talk a little more about some of the examples you saw of this idea of some of these women who are prostitutes having wealth, like what some of the examples of that are, and like just now you were also saying that they might at some point retire, what would have happened to them then. And you also mentioned the idea that some of them might have been able to purchase their freedom, the ones who didn't start off being at as high a class but were in brothels, and I wondered, did that happen, and if so, what happened to those women after that, if you know anything about any of those
Okay.
issues?
Well, when they retire, it's basically if like a lot of them would retire, they'd be just very rich, wealthy. They would retire, have their own houses, have their own places. There was an account, and I think it was the wall of Athens after something happened where it fell, and she had enough money, she could rebuild it. She gave them all the money, they rebuilt the walls. It was insane how rich some of these prostitutes really were. As far as the brothels, it's slaves that can go in there. And instead of, like I said, working for their owners, they had to obviously give some of their pay to their owners, but they got to keep some of it, so they slowly built that up until they bought their own freedoms, and if they decided to stay in those brothels, they could. If they decided to go do something else, they could. It just depended. And depending on how good their job was, they could like very fast go in the ranks and they could become a hetera. And like we said with the hetera, they got to pick who they wanted to like have their customers. They got to decide. And for the higher class ones, it was the men were giving them gifts, trying to get them to hire them. They were trying to seduce them. And they decided if it was yes or no. Because, I mean, there's one account where a very poor citizen wrote a letter to one of the high class and saying how he wanted to hire her, trying to write a romantic letter, and it ended up there was some mud on the envelope. And she said, because I know there's mud on the envelope, you're low class and you're below me, and she wouldn't hire him.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you.
So, technically we're out of time, but if there's one more question, we can take it since we do have the 10-minute window. Any other questions? Okay.
Well, I'll leave it if anyone else wants to.
Any students want to ask questions? All right, Dr. Shea.
Well, I taught a course that did on strategy, policy, and war. And one of the books that I taught was the Thucydides Peloponnesian War. And so I asked this question. I'm just wondering what you think about. To what extent do you think the Peloponnesian War should be required reading for any serious course on military strategy, and what does it tell about human nature?
That's directed to both of the military.
I'll take a stab at that question. Okay, so with Peloponnesian War, obviously, you see like I said before, you see a schism from the old, I guess, way of Pericles of defend what you have, attack what you can when you have to, and you move from that with the Peloponnesian War into the idea of the individual man and attacking for the sole purpose of just attacking and defending whatever you can due to the fact that chaos was attacking you from all directions. And you have the Sicilian expedition. You have Milos, the slaughter of Milos. You have all these different battles and sieges that are really unnecessary and really until that time hadn't really been observed in Greek history. So, and like you're saying with the idea of the human, can you repeat?
Basically, what general lessons can we draw about human nature and the study of war in general, not specific to that geographical or historical context?
Right.
Well, strategy as a whole throughout human history.
Right.
There's some lessons. I'm just wondering what you think about that.
Yeah. Well, obviously Socrates, the actual the philosophical teachings of Socrates really didn't apply to the majority of Athenian citizens, even though he was very well known. He's very well known now. And really, his love of self and love of the spirit really didn't apply to everybody, especially not Alcibiades, and especially not leaders like Cleon, who was very much a warlock as well. You also have, and then you have Nicias, who is very much a peacemaker, but was also interested in propelling Athens at any cost necessary, whether it be peace or war. So, like I said, you have this. There's not only is it important to really understand the battle and the military history, but like you're saying, the idea of the human mind, the morality, the personality, and the integrity of the Greeks during this time is really fascinating and really should be observed more in teaching.
Alex, you want a minute for a quick response?
Yeah, real quick. I think it should be in textbooks. I think it should be in textbooks when you're in grade school because I think the reason why it's not put in textbooks right now is probably because it's so short-lived. But yeah, there's so many good morsels in just a short time period with Athens blunders and antagonistic disputes with Sparta and its own allies that it's definitely an example of kind of what not to do or what to do, in regards to empire at the time and creating a sustaining empire. So the Peloponnesian War is very crucial.
I'd like to add in that Courtney could actually be included in this conversation because she could tell everybody who Pericles' supposed chief tactical strategist was.
Aspia?
Aspasia, yeah. His personal attire.
There we go. All right. Okay. Yeah, back, go ahead.
Oh, I was about to clap.
Oh, okay.